still logging in, so let me give just a few seconds to make sure all the screens are on. Okay, great. Why don't we get started? Good morning, everyone. My name is Mark Keem. I'm a member of the House of Delegates, and I want to welcome you to the official press conference that will announce the launch of the Virginia Asian American Pacific Islander Caucus. And the reason why we are gathering today is not only to announce this historic decision by our Speaker and our General Assembly, but also to commemorate something that I wish we were not commemorating, which is the fact that over the last year, we know a lot of Americans have suffered. COVID has affected every single American in so many different ways. So many of us have lost friends and relatives to the disastrous COVID pandemic. Others have lost their economic opportunities. But for some people in America, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, they were taunted, attacked, assaulted, and some were even murdered during this year. A lot of it risen by anti-Asian bigotry and prejudice that's been around for 200 years or more. And so today is a national day of action to stop Asian hate. And on this day in Virginia, we're taking action as well. The action we're taking is the formation of an Asian American Pacific Islander caucus as part of the legislature. To start off this morning, I'd like to recognize the Speaker of the House, Eileen Philipcorn, who made this possible today. So I want to first thank the Speaker for joining us, and let me turn this over to her.
Thank you so much, Delegate Keem, and good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us this morning. First and foremost, I want to thank Delegates Converse-Fowler, Delegate Keem, Delegate Subramaniam, Delegate Tran, and Senator Hashmi for their leadership in making the creation of this caucus a reality. The events of the past weeks really have been heartbreaking. And I think it's also serves as a stark reminder that the issues of bigotry and racism are far from being solved. The pain many are feeling right now at this exact moment are real, and the pain of loss of life, but also the pain, loss of sense of safety and belonging. And the formation of this caucus should send a loud and clear message that AAPI Virginians belong in the Commonwealth. Their elected leadership at the highest levels of the Commonwealth of Virginia stand with them side by side. And that is why we're here today. This caucus will ensure that at every step of the way, AAPI Virginians will have their voices heard in the policy-making process. But policy alone obviously will not end this violence or stop the prejudice or stop the discrimination that so many Virginians face in this moment. It'll require all of us, every single one, every single Virginian, to forcefully denounce the harmful stereotypes, the scapegoating, and ultimately, which has caused so many of these attacks. So today is another small mark of progress in that direction. So thank you all so much for being here today. Thank you again to Delegates Converse-Fowler, Delegate Keem, Delegate Subramaniam, Delegate Tran, and Senator Hashmi for your leadership in making the creation of this caucus a reality. I will now pass the virtual mic over to the next speaker.
Well, thank you so much, Speaker Philipcorn, for your support for this important endeavor. And good morning. I'm Ghazala Hashmi, and I have the honor of representing Senate District 10, which includes large parts of the city of Richmond and Chesterfield County, as well as all of Powhatan County. I was elected to office in 2019, and my background is South Asian. I was born in India, and I immigrated to the United States when I was 4.5 years old in 1969. I'm happy to share also that although they couldn't join us this morning, Senate Majority Leader Dick Saslaw and Senate Democratic Caucus Chair Mamie Locke have expressed their full support for this new AAPI caucus. Those of us who are the founding members of the AAPI caucus have for several months discussed its need in the Commonwealth. And this past year in particular has seen the escalation of violence, both in targeted attacks of hate and abusive rhetoric against the AAPI communities in the United States. The past administration and the White House frequently sought to demean and dehumanize the AAPI and took little action in response to growing attacks against vulnerable elderly Asian Americans, against Asian American women, or against the bullying of AAPI children in school. The violence culminated tragically on March 16th in the mass murder of 8 people in Atlanta, 6 of whom were Asian American women. But this history of racism, of xenophobia, and open bigotry isn't new. The Page Act of 1875, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II are prominent examples of how, within our collective history, the AAPI continue to be regarded as outsiders or as foreigners within their own country. So today, as has been mentioned, today, March 26th, is the National Stop Asian Hate Day of Action. And as we announce our new caucus, we join our voices with the voices of numerous Virginians and other Americans to call for an end to hate crimes and violence against the AAPI, and also to shine a spotlight on the bigotry, the xenophobia, the demeaning rhetoric that is often the ground on which violence against the AAPI is nurtured. And now I'd like to pass the mic on to our delegate, Converse Fowler.
Thank you so much, Senator Hashmi. Thank you all for being here. My name is Kelly Converse Fowler. I was elected to the Virginia House of Delegates in 2017, and I represent the 21st District in Virginia Beach and Chesapeake. The fastest growing population in America is the Asian American Pacific Islander community. There are over 30 different countries represented and over 100 languages spoken within the AAPI community. In the US, 20% of all AAPIs are Filipino. Here in Virginia Beach, where I grew up, we have the highest concentration of Filipino Americans in the state. I am proud to live in and represent a district that is filled with diverse faces and voices. Asian American Pacific Islanders have been a huge part of the workforce in our country. From the laying of the Transcontinental Railroad to the migrant workers picking lettuce in Watsonville, California, like my grandmother did years ago after the horrible riots and violence that occurred there in 1930. She later met my grandfather, who immigrated here from the Philippines and served this country in the US Navy to earn his citizenship. The AAPI community has a long history of being the model minority, known for enduring inequity, racism, and xenophobia. Today, the formation of the AAPI Caucus symbolizes a shift in the Virginia AAPI community. We will not be silent any longer. We will advocate for AAPI Virginians and issues that affect us. We will speak out about injustice towards our AAPI community. Complacency and silence lead to hate. I am honored to be here today and speaking out with my fellow AAPI colleagues on this day. Today is a day of action to stop AAPI hate. We are using our voices to speak out with one voice. We call on our allies to stand with us. Do not be silent. Do not be complacent. We will no longer be the model minority. We will no longer be the scapegoat. Thank you so much for listening, and I will pass the mic off to the next speaker.
Good morning. Good morning. I am Kathy Tran. I was elected in 2017 to I'm sorry, an emotional morning this morning for me. I actually didn't realize how much I needed this and how powerful it is that we are coming together. I was elected in 2017 to represent the 42nd District in Southeast and Southern Fairfax County in the Virginia House of Delegates. My family came to the United States when I was almost 2 years old as boat refugees from Vietnam, because for my parents, this country embodies hope, opportunity, and freedom. The disturbing and steep rise in violence, bigotry, and racism against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, the rise in vandalism against Asian American businesses, and the targeted killing of 6 Asian American women in Georgia last week show us that we must continue to fight for inclusion and justice for everyone. Our work in the Virginia AAPI Caucus stands on the shoulders of many who have come before us. Asian American and Pacific Islander community leaders and organizations have worked for generations to serve AAPI communities in Virginia and to move Virginia forward. We are committed to drawing upon the insights and expertise of our community leaders, and we will seek input from those working daily in service to AAPI Virginians, the Virginia Asian Advisory Board, and the Office of New Americans Advisory Board. Our movement to lift up the voices of Virginia's AAPI community is part of a larger movement for racial and economic justice. We rise only when all of us rise. And we are deeply grateful that the Virginia Legislative Black Caucus, members of the Virginia Latino Caucus, and so many of our state and House caucus mates stand in solidarity with us to stop AAPI hate. We are committed to coalition building and being allies to achieve our common goals of a more just and equitable future for Virginians. And I turn the mic over to Delegate Subramaniam.
Thank you, Delegate Tran, and thank you all for being here. I'm Delegate Suhas Subramaniam. I represent the 87th District, which includes Loudoun and Prince William counties, as well as Dulles Airport. And like many Asian Americans, Dulles Airport was a port of entry for my family when they immigrated from India in the late 1970s to build a better life. And I want to echo the sentiments of others regarding the importance of this caucus amidst a rising tide of hate throughout this country. And I want to add that as we create the agenda for this caucus, we want to hear from you, Virginians. That's why we will be launching a listening tour very soon in April that includes planned regional listening sessions throughout Virginia, including Central Virginia, Northern Virginia, and the Hampton Roads Tidewater area. These sessions will help us gauge the issues of concerns in these communities, but we plan to incorporate the feedback we receive from these listening sessions into the caucus's policy agenda, which we hope to release in May, which coincides with the AAPI Heritage Month. And we will also look into pursuing legislation in 2022 and beyond. So thank you so much for being a part of this, and we really appreciate your support. And I'll hand it over now to Delegate Keene.
Thank you, Suhas, and to all of our colleagues who just joined us. First, let me acknowledge the fact that we have many of our colleagues in the House and the Senate joining us this morning. It is so good to see all of you. Thank you for standing with us, joining us on this special day. But more importantly, thank you for what you've already been doing, because the work that you're doing is what we're trying to do is to continue that progressive change that we need. Just to clarify, this caucus is literally being formed as we speak, and we don't have officers yet. We don't have all of the structures of an organization yet. What we have is a strong motivation to get things done. And so all of you who've joined us today, you will be a part of this in some way or another. We're going to make sure that every voice is heard as we move this caucus forward. We're going to take a little time over the next few weeks to organize ourselves, have some listening sessions, check in with all of our colleagues, especially those members of the Black Caucus and the Latino Caucus and others who've been working in the field for so long. We want to learn from you and to really become a mentee as well as a partner with you. And so in that spirit, today, the 4 or 5 members that you heard are what we're just informally calling our founding members. These are members whose origins and ethnicity are from Asia Pacific Islands. And we wanted to just show the fact that we have come so far in Virginia. When I was elected 12 years ago, I had the honor of joining this august body. But what I realized is in the 400-year history that I joined at the time in 2010, I was the first person who was born in Asia, who's not a child of a military service member or anything like that, an Asian who was born in Asia, who immigrated to this country as a young 14-year-old immigrant, and then eventually became an American by naturalization. And then I ran for office and won. And so in 2010, when I had the privilege of being sworn in, I realized how quickly our Commonwealth was changing. Little could I have anticipated, 12 years later, you just saw the breadth and the amazing depth of our diversity. We have people from various different backgrounds, ethnicities, races, as religions, as well as looking around our screens here, we have people from the genders and sexual orientation and identity, and in so many different ways that we all work together. We want to bring our all full diversity. But in that spirit, it's not enough for us to just be represented. It's not enough for us to just be seen. It is critical that we pass our views and our viewpoints into the law so that our Commonwealth's laws and policies reflect that diversity. that everybody in Virginia feels that their voice is heard when the laws are passed and the language in the code of Virginia and the regulatory and the administrative rules reflect their values. And that is the purpose of this caucus. So as we move forward in the next few months, leading up to the 2022 legislative session and beyond, our goal is to develop a set of robust policy positions. Clearly, some of these are going to be very familiar to all of us because we all stand for these issues. The idea of equal justice, inequality, and equity in everything we do, making sure that the government services are always provided with language as well as cultural competency so that every Virginian of every background can feel that their government is for them and their taxpayer funding is used the right way. The idea that when somebody is victimized, especially what we've seen with the AAPI community over the last year, but all of us who are victimized, whether it's what we've seen with the tragic situations with no-knock warrants or with police being extremely assertive in their efforts to try to restrain people and leading in the death and unfortunate passing of so many of our African-American brothers and sisters. We want to make sure that the criminal justice system works for all of us. And what that means for the AAPI community is that they need to recognize when a crime or an assault or some incident happens where the origin may be of racial bigotry, it may be of bias, it may be of perception that that person doesn't belong here as a foreigner. We want to make sure that that's captured as part of law enforcement authority so that they understand the depth of hate that's out there for people that look like me. It also means that as our government does business with other businesses, small businesses, contracts and such, that we ensure that all of the voices that have the economic opportunities in America and in Virginia in particular have a chance to bid for those jobs. And so we have contracting opportunities. And finally, we want to make sure that we develop further leaders, people, some of us who have the honor of serving in public office, we have 6 or 7 now that are of Asian origin. But there clearly are way more people out there that can be serving at every level of government. So we want to encourage that they step up, we identify them, we nurture them, we encourage them, we mentor them, and we provide them with the resources so that they can really become the owners of this Commonwealth, just like you and I are trying to do as well. So these are some of the broad principles that we stand for. We're going to turn this into law once we hear from our community over the next few months. So with that, I'd like to conclude the speaking portion and then turn this over to our amazing House and Senate communication staffs to moderate the next portion where we will hear from reporters. I know we have a number of reporters online, so we can just turn it over to them. And then at the end, we will close out with, I think Senator Hashmi will close us out.
Hi, so my name is Kate Sarna. I'm the press secretary for the Virginia House Democrats, and Jacqueline Hickston is also here. She's the communications for the Senate Democrats. Are there any reporters? Okay, Jackie DeFusco, do you have a question?
I do, and I'm sorry if you guys went over some of this. I had audio issues, so I didn't hear you for the first 5 minutes, but we'll listen back to that recording. But anyway, I know that broadly some national data has shown a rise in anti-Asian hate. Is there data being kept on that specifically in Virginia? And can somebody speak to the data that does or does not exist? And then I have another question, but I'll just leave that one out there first.
Why don't I take that first? The simple answer is there are some data being collected, but certainly not adequate. And that goes to both federal as well as states. There are only a few counties and states in the entire country that does a good job in collecting the data and also disaggregating it. So for example, when you say, oh, that person looked Asian, or the police officer might check off the box Asian, Asian could be one of 40 national origins. It can also mean a perception of somebody who looks maybe a little bit, somewhere between Arab American, Latino American, but not quite as whatever it might be. So from their perspective, they have to just check one box. Wouldn't it be better if they actually had some people that can identify that and disaggregate that to say, oh, that person is Vietnamese American as opposed to Thai American, or Chinese American as opposed to Japanese American. So to the extent that we can try to come down to the disaggregated level so that we can really understand the pain of the community, that's something that's lacking. And that is clearly one issue that we've been working at both the federal and we will be at the state level.
Okay.
Can I chime in?
Yes, please.
So Jackie, I know you may have heard the Stop AAPI Hate is an organization that's formed asking community members to report incidents of AAPI hate that are coming up around the country. We know these numbers are underreported because most often people are afraid to come forward. They might not have the language abilities, the trust with law enforcement, and they just don't know how to report. But AAPI Hate has reported in the last year, there were 49 incidents in Virginia. If you look at Maryland, DC, and Virginia, it's about 150. The report for this last year is available on their website. And I echo Delegate Keem's comments about the need to disaggregate data.
Delegate Subramani here. I'll add that I'll pile on. I do think that the numbers we do have are underreported, and that I actually receive emails and calls to my office from Asian Americans, especially South Asians, who they want to report it to me, but they don't feel comfortable reporting it to law enforcement. Hopefully, this one agenda item that we can address moving forward.
Great. And then perhaps for Senator Hashmi, I know that you had a bill that sought to perhaps expand the state's hate crime laws, and that was killed last session. So can you explain what more you think needs to be done in this area specifically, and kind of what that will look like moving forward?
Thank you for that question, Jackie. Yes, the bill was to expand. We've got the definition of hate crimes in the code, but we do need to expand our comprehensive understanding of what hate crimes mean and how we might be able to further prosecute hate crimes in the Commonwealth. So the bill was a bill that sought to focus on the intent of the perpetrator, the person who is targeting individuals based on their perception of their identity, whether it's ethnic, religious, racial, sexual orientation, that the perception of the perpetrator, his or her intent is just as important, or if not more so important than the actual victim. So I was working with the Commonwealth's Attorney Shannon Taylor on this particular legislation. We certainly hope to revisit it in 2022. As Delegate Keem articulated, a lot of times the victims of attack are facing violence because of the perpetrator's perception of who they are or what communities they represent. And so we really need to be conscious as we're thinking about hate crimes, how we are able to protect the individuals of targeted communities. And oftentimes hate crimes are very deliberate attempts to terrorize an entire community, not just the individual that's being attacked. And we have to be able to support the communities that are frequently targeted for these crimes.
Thank you.
Susan?
Yes, hi, good morning. I'm representing the Connection newspaper this morning. I was wondering if you have a schedule, Delegate Tran or Delegate Keem, for your listening sessions that'll occur in this area, or a link or reference that our readers could go to find out when they are scheduled.
Thanks, Susan. Good to see you. And I think as Delegate Subramaniam had explained, we are still working to flesh out that schedule. We know they'll be held in April. We're looking at calendars, wanting to make sure that we're able to host meetings at a time when people are able to attend, understanding Ramadan starts. So we're just going to make sure that we adjust that. We will make that widely available on our social media, and maybe work with the caucus to help us get that out to reporters as well. But we are going to be engaging directly with community organizations in the 3 areas. So we're going to have one in the Northern Virginia region, one in Central Virginia, and one in the Virginia Beach, Hampton Roads, Tidewater area. They're going to be virtual. So, we're going to be working on that, but we know we'll have them in April to prepare for a report rollout in May.
Thank you.
Are there any more questions? Jackie, your hand is still raised. Are there any other questions?
Delegate Tran, I was just, I noticed how emotional you were about this issue, and I'm just curious, what's been the hardest part for you in dealing with this? What sort of brings up those emotions? Anything in particular?
Oh, now you're going to make me turn on all my waterworks.
I'm sorry.
No, I mean, the way that I have been processing what happened in Georgia last week, I think is multi-layered. And, I think for everybody in the community, first you look at what happened, the targeted rampage against 3, Asian American businesses, the deliberate killing and attacks of these individuals, 6 of whom were Asian American women, and the intersection of race, racism, sexism, misogyny, workplace violence, and how our history and our institutions have led to this moment where so many women of color and Asian American Pacific Islander women are working in such vulnerable conditions. And so that in and of itself is a lot to wrap our arms around. And frankly, when the media says, is this a crime, a racist crime? Is this, sexist and misogyny? Is this gun violence? Is this workplace violence? The fact that that question continues to be asked and how to frame the conversation shows how deeply rooted these issues are for our communities and for communities of color, because the answer is yes, all of the above. So I'm dealing with that. Then you have this extraordinary rise in violence against our community. And when you look at the type of violence, it's everything from literally, getting beat up and kicked at and spit upon and having words hurled at you to, there was a woman who was taking out the trash in Brooklyn who had acid thrown at her. A man riding a subway who somebody came up and slashed his face from side to side with a box cutter, and not a single person stood up to help him. Just last week, I read about a woman who was hit with a steel pipe. We're talking about their neighborhood streets on public transportation. It's as if we have been so othered and that we're at the point that we're dehumanized, and that you could be cruel against us, you can be a bully against us, because nobody's going to stand up to help us. Then I'm reading about everybody's experience growing up as an Asian American Pacific Islander. The questions that we are asked on a daily basis as kids, like, where are you from? No, I mean, really, where are you from? How could you be eating that? Why are your parents talking to you in some other language? Why do your eyes look like that? And we take all these microaggressions and we pack them up in a little box, and we think that they're just a rite of passage of growing up in America. And I'm reading that, and I'm thinking about my own experience and unpacking that. And that's hard. It's just a lot of trauma. And then my own child comes home to me and says, my husband asked him, have you been hearing things at school? He said, oh, the other day in the cafeteria, somebody asked the staff, should we be blaming COVID on the Chinese people? Why do they eat snakes and other animals? My kid is 8. And I asked him, I said, does this bother you? It doesn't seem like it bothers you. What's going on? And he said, oh, it does. It's racist, Mia. And I was like, what does racist mean? And he says, it means when you make fun of somebody based on what they look like, who they believe in. And as a mom, I'm really proud that my 8-year-old son knows that, because we're teaching him well. But at the same time, he shouldn't have to know that. No child of color in America needs to know that when they're that little. And it makes me think how generational this has been. And I saw somebody post on Twitter, my father told me that when I grow up, doesn't matter how much I make, doesn't matter what job I have, people first see you as somebody who's Asian. And I had this moment where I stopped and I said, my father said the same thing to me. And I say the same things to my kids, that you are a Jewish Vietnamese child, and that's how people are going to see you. And that's wrong. As much as I love my heritage, but for that to be the point where people stop and how they treat you is wrong. So that's why I'm emotional today. That's why representation matters. That's why allyship matters. And that's why I'm so grateful to every single one of my caucus mates who are with us in spirit, if not here today. Because this is how together we will overcome and we will rise up.
Thank you for that.
Any other questions? Mel, do you have a question?
Hey, yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
I was just saying thank you, Delegate Tran, for sharing that. This question is just broadly for any of the lawmakers, but I'm curious about any specific policy areas or proposals that you guys have been thinking about working on as a caucus that affect the AAPI community. I know you're planning to have listening sessions, but just curious if there's anything right now, any areas that you're planning to work on.
I can jump in, and then if my colleagues want to join me as well. One area that I was looking at, well, in several years, but this year in particular, and I just wasn't able to work on it during the special session and regular session because of the limitations on not only the number of bills, but the fact that we're doing this virtually. And I also wanted to make sure I got the policy right. But as I mentioned earlier, language access is one of the key things. Asian American Pacific Islanders, no matter how many generations some of us have been in this country, we still have a lot of our population that are still dependent on their native language, not English. And so some people might be somewhat familiar, but when it comes to technical language, it might be a little bit hard for them to decipher what technical English terminology is. So having language assistance is very important, especially when it comes to a basic right like voting, which is why I really want to make sure that we've done a great job in Virginia, unlike some other states. We have actually gone forward to make sure that every voter who wants to vote has all the opportunities and the access and availability to do so, including assistance from those that want to provide them language assistance. But as you remember from COVID, there are at least two areas where after COVID hit us, we had some language problems. One is with VEC, the employment, for those that were unemployed, that were applying for unemployment. The only language that was online on the website was Spanish, but everything else basically was Google Translate. And so we wanted to provide some way of making sure that we have language assistance, both either written or in oral form. And that was a hard nut to crack, because it's, how do you stand up a program with lots of multilingual translators? Do we bring in contractors? Do we have online service, maybe like some kind of a call-in center? So that was one that was difficult. And then the other, of course, now in light of the distribution of vaccine, but similarly what we did testing, we all know about the disparities in unfortunately, in the Black and brown communities, both in terms of the impact of who is the frontline workers and therefore being more impacted and more infected. And then now, as the distribution of vaccine is going on, we still see that disparity with the African-American, Latino communities and some Asian American communities. And part of that is because all the information right now online is all in English, which for people like us, it's great. But for the rest of the folks in Virginia who just have a hard time understanding it, we need to have nonprofits, the churches, families, others go out there, and young generations like Kathy's kids would have to go out there and translate for their parents. And so that's not a good system for us to have if you want to deliver services to everybody in Virginia. So language assistance and culturally appropriate language assistance is, I think, the key thing for us.
All right, any more questions? Please raise your hand on the screen. Oh, Julie, one last question. Julie, all right, you can speak. What's your question? Sorry, ma'am, you're on mute.
Sorry. Thank you. My name is Julie Laghi. I don't have a question, but I would like to share some actions that we have done in Richmond, Virginia. I am the vice chair of AASOCD, which is Asian American Society of Central Virginia. I'm a Chinese born in Singapore. What I would like to share is after the incident in Atlanta, the shooting, in Richmond, Virginia, we held a candlelight vigil last Saturday, joining a nationwide candlelight vigil. And we had attendance of almost 300 people. And it was held at the Richmond Korean Presbyterian Church. And this past Tuesday, we had a first AASOCD Stop Asian Hate rally. Everything was done in a very short period of time. So unfortunately, we probably could have got more people to attend from the General Assembly and even Delegate Mark Kim that we know very well. First and foremost, we did have Senator Ghazala Hashmi, Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger. We had all the county officials, the county manager of Henrico, Mr. John Vidhulkers, and we had also the administrator of Chesterfield County, Dr. Casey, and many other speakers. And we had the Virginia Asian Chamber of Commerce, the Virginian Advisory Board. So what I want just to say is that we had this rally and it was really a successful rally. And we had almost 300 attendees, but the Richmond paper underreported us and said it was just 100. But nevertheless, we are hoping to move forward and probably have another rally and maybe have support from all of you to attend. And basically, what I want to say is that our voices were heard, and we are hoping and still working with the various counties and to help us to move forward to fight and stop Asian hate crime. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Any more reporter questions? One last question for everybody. No, Park? Do you have a question?
Actually, it's not a question. I want to share my feeling. I know you guys already know that, but we have something rally in the Wednesday. But that time, I got the feeling I want to share. There is more effective use of some question. So I have been speaking as an Asian American woman before I am a reporter. So AAPI parents believe that our silence has become the subject of the racist hate crime for our children. I hope you can listen to our voice and feel that you are working for them. Please thinking deeply and what you need to do in this Asian American community and do it immediately. We speak our voice from our perspective. So please working for us from you and your colleague perspective. Just I want to share my feeling or kind of your.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I think that's there's no more reporter questions. And I think that I can hand it over back to Delegate Keem or Senator Hashmi if you guys have anything else to share.
Well, thank you so much, Kate, and thank you to all of our staff who helped us to organize and present to this press conference. And as I'm sure you've heard, that there is such a degree of passion and interest in making sure that we have effective representation for our AAPI communities. And I know I join my fellow legislators in committing ourselves to this work, especially in this upcoming year, as we draft legislation that will help to protect our AAPI community, but also to engage the communities in the vital roles that they play in the Commonwealth. So thank you. I especially want to thank our fellow legislators from both the House and the Senate who were able to join us this morning. And I know we have wonderful allies in both chambers. And I thank Senator Mamie Locke, who was able to join us briefly and demonstrate the support of the Democratic Caucus as well. And I thank the community leaders who were here and present and who have laid down a very strong foundation for us to continue to build as a caucus. And in particular, I want to thank the Virginia Asian Advisory Board for all the work that it has continued to do these past several years. And thank you also to the members of the press who have joined us, and certainly feel free to reach out to us individually if you have further questions. Thank you, everyone.
All right.